In my last video, I talked about how owning a home is an essential part of the American dream. And why not? Owning a home allows you to have a place to live while building equity. And most importantly, it shows all your friends that you got it like that.
You already know who it is.
Renting, on the other hand, is often seen as throwing money away.
Shut up and take my money.
You probably heard your crazy uncle saying something like, if you rent, all you are doing is paying off someone else's mortgage.
You work for me.
And while this might have been true 10 years ago, it might not be true today. An interesting article that I saw the other day said the US is now witnessing the biggest gap in the monthly cost between owning a home and renting in over 50 years. Look at this clip of the cost of renting versus buying and pay attention to the last part. So in short, renting is cheaper than buying a home in 2024. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next one. Just kidding. Life is never that simple. Money is not always the factor when choosing to rent or buy. Things such as flexibility, lifestyle, long-term versus short-term, and market conditions are just a few of the factors when considering to rent or buy. Hello and welcome. My name is Ukash Finance, and yes, that is my real name. If you enjoy financial content like this, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. It really helps out the channel, and make sure to watch till the end where I do a real life cost comparison between renting a home versus buying a home in Dallas, Texas, or you can skip to that now, your choice. So first, let's talk about pros and cons of buying versus renting. Pro number one, the first thing that everyone talks about when buying a home is building equity over the long term. As you pay down your mortgage, you build equity in the home, which is basically the difference between the property's market value and the outstanding balance on the loan secured by the property. For example, if your home is valued at $300,000 and you owe $200,000 on your mortgage, your equity in the home would be $100,000. Pro number two, tax benefits. Owning a home can offer several tax benefits which can help reduce your overall tax liability. These come in the form of property tax deductions, mortgage interest deductions, and capital gains exclusion. A lot of fancy words, so let me give you an example of how paying property tax will help you come April. Let's say the value of your home is $300,000, and in a state like Texas, the property tax is at 1.6%. This means you pay $4,800 in property tax annually. So when it's time to file taxes, this reduces your overall taxable income by $4,800. And just to clarify, this is not a tax credit. This just means that you will now be in a lower tax bracket and hopefully pay less in taxes overall. Pro number three, stability. When you own a home, you have the opportunity to establish long-term roots in a community. This stability can be particularly beneficial for families with children who want to provide a consistent environment for their upbringing. Knowing that you have a permanent place to call home can provide a sense of security and belonging. For some people, this might actually be more important than the equity or tax benefits. Now for the cons for being a homeowner. Owning a home has a higher barrier to entry, including a down payment, closing costs, appraisal fees, lawyer costs, and ongoing expenses such as mortgage payments and property taxes. This can take a toll on your finances, especially if you lose your job or maybe a loved one gets sick and now you can't work as much. Con number two, maintenance responsibilities. That's right, you are now the proud owner of a broken toilet and a leaking roof. Just kidding, but not really. As a homeowner, you are responsible for maintenance and repairs, which can sometimes cost thousands of dollars and can take a lot of time. And con number three, less flexibility. Say you get a new job that aligns more with your passions and pays great. Only problem is, this job is halfway across the country, but you're a homeowner. You can't just give 2 weeks notice and pack your bags.
That's it, I'm getting out of here.
You now have to try and sell your home, and depending on the state of the market, you can even lose money when you sell. Now, I know what you are thinking. I can just rent out the place, become a landlord. Well, that comes with its own challenges. Ever heard of squatters?
The lady actually just inherited this place, but she's insanely busy with the funeral arrangements at the moment, so plenty of options for squatting start date.
Squatters can cause you to lose even more money rather than if you chose to sell the home in the first place. Now let's talk about some pros for renting. Pro number one, lower upfront cost. Renting typically requires lower upfront cost compared to buying, as you don't need a large sum of money to cover the down payment or closing cost. All you typically need is a deposit, which is usually equal to 1 month's rent. Ramit Sethi, who is an American writer and financial advisor, is famous for advocating never to buy a home to live in.
What if you discovered that real estate isn't as good of an investment as everybody says?
But rather rent the place where you live in and invest the remaining money in the stock market and other investments.
In fact, data shows that the stock market typically trounces the performance of real estate as an investment.
Pro number two, no maintenance responsibilities. Renters are not usually responsible for maintenance and repairs, which can save you time and money. Remember that broken toilet? Well, guess who pays for that? Not you. Pro number three, financial freedom. Renting can free up capital for other investments or expenses, providing financial flexibility. You can probably buy things now as a renter that you might not be able to buy as a homeowner because you are always thinking about the mortgage. And now let's talk about some cons for renting. Con number one, no equity. Renters do not build equity in the property and miss out on potential appreciation, which is why if you are a renter, it is a must that you seek out other avenues of investing. Remember I talked about having more free capital as a renter? Well, the idea is that you invest that free capital into the S&P or other investments and potentially get a 7 to 10% return on your money. Con number two, limited control. Renters have limited control over customizations and renovations, as changes must typically be approved by the landlord. Okay, fair enough. You don't own the place, so you don't have the right to paint all the walls green, pink, and orange. Con number three, rent increases. Rent prices may increase over time, leading to higher housing costs without the benefits of building equity. This always sucks, and in some states, rent increases can be as high as 9% annually. Okay, so now that we talked about the pros and cons of buying versus renting, let's do a real-life comparison of exactly how much money you would save if you chose to rent. The New York Times made a financial calculator for exactly this purpose. This calculator was last updated on May 2024, and it takes into account things like how long you plan to stay in the house, rent growth versus home price growth, investment return rate and inflation rate, and many other things. So let's have a look. So I will leave the link for this calculator in the link below. It's by the New York Times. It's a pretty cool calculator. Feel free to mess around with it. How much you would save if you rented versus buying over, 5 years, 10 years, or however X amount of years you want to check it out for. The city that I chose, as for our example, it's Dallas, Texas. I found that Dallas rental price and the price of buying a home is pretty much comparable when you compare it to the nation as a whole. Obviously, we could do places like San Diego where buying a house is $1 million and the rent is about $5,000. San Diego is actually one of the places where buying is actually better than renting. But for 90% of states, it's actually the other way around. Okay, so according to Redfin, the average price to buy a home is $446,209. So already put that in. It rounds it up, or it rounds it down. And the average rent is $2,100 for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. So I'll come back to this, but there's other things that you can play around with. Current mortgage rate 7.3, down payment 20%. You can choose the length of the mortgage, other things like home price growth. Obviously, the house should increase, not always, but 9 out of 10 should increase in value year over year, and rent will also increase. In Dallas, it's about 3% annually. Other places in the country, it's as high as 9%. We also have inflation rate. I know it's not exactly 3% now, but keep it 3% for now. You have property tax in Dallas. It's actually on the higher end, 1.6%. And then you have marginal tax rate, other tax things here. Obviously, you have an upfront cost for buying a home. You have closing costs. You have different costs that are associated with buying a home. So we'll put 4% for that cost if you did want to sell your home, which we have to take into account, which you might not be selling right away, but even if you sold 10 or 20 years down the road or 5 years down the road, or if you got a job and you have to move, so that's usually around 6%. We have maintenance fees, things like toilets going out, lights going out. Since it's a house, you're gonna have to pay for that now. And we have insurance, other monthly fees, and then you have a security deposit. So 1 month, $2,100, and we also have renter's insurance. I did 1% for that. Okay, so let's kind of play around with this. So hypothetically, if you wanted to rent versus buying for 1 year, you would save an insane amount because you have all of those costs that comes with buying a house, all the closing costs, all the appraisal fees, and different fees. So you would actually save $51,000 if you just bought a house versus renting for 1 year. This takes into account that you would sell after 1 year, and then you have selling costs, and you have different costs. But now let's say you're gonna buy versus rent for 5 years. So now, if you rented the same house, if you rented for $2,100, obviously we're gonna take into account rent growth 3%, and if you bought the house for $446,000, and even though you get equity for 3%, over 5 years, you would actually save $69,000 renting versus buying. Obviously, you have your initial cost right here, $2,100. You have your 20%, which comes down to $107,000, and then you have recurring cost, right? So for 5 years, $2,100 plus 3% every year, that comes out to $135,128. It would be $218. And then you have opportunity costs would be $10K, and then you have opportunity costs for buying $39,000 here. So let's say you wanted to do it for 5 years now. For 10 years now. So in 10 years, if you bought, you would actually save $86,000. Okay, and what about 15 years? So that comes out to $98,000. See how these numbers are changing? In 15 years, you've paid $473,380. But if you bought the house, it would have been $695,000 and some change, right? This takes into account the interest, the recurring fees, maintenance, property tax, insurance, all these different things that are not associated when renting the house. Okay, so let's go with 30 years now, right? We could obviously do 20 years. You would save $100K. What about 25 years? So now in 25 years, interesting. So the number actually comes down, right? Because when we had 20 years, it was actually $100K. But now it looks like the longer you live, you build equity, right? And more value over the house. So if you lived for 25 years, if you're gonna rent versus buying, you would have saved $84,000. So let's say 30 years now, right? That's usually how long the mortgage is good for. If you're gonna rent versus buying over 30 years, that's when it actually starts to balance out. So you would have spent the same amount of money over 30 years. But again, that's a very long time. But what about 31 years? Still same. 35 years? Still same. 37 years? Still same. So what about 40 years? 40 is exactly the same. Wow. And I think it doesn't pass 40, right? I think 40 is the max. Okay. So in Dallas, Texas, with the way the current market is, you actually spend the same amount of money if you rented a house for $2,100, including 3%, increasing your rent by 3% every year, and then versus buying a house for $446,000. And with all the fees, property tax, maintenance costs, different fees that comes with buying a house, over 40 years, you would have spent the same amount of money, $3,790,000. Okay, so I hope you learned something in this video. And if you did, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments below why you are inclined to renting or buying.